It's Pancakes and Politics Overdrive, and Overdrive we are going. We're in the community, and this morning we're talking with Senators Gary Peters and Debbie Stabenow. You don't want to miss it.
Welcome to Pancakes and Politics Overdrive, presented by PNC Bank. Pancakes and Politics goes to the neighborhood. Today's broadcast is set in Detroit's jewel, the Northend, at Greater New Mount Moriah Baptist Church. Presenting partner, Business Leaders for Michigan. Our guests today are Senators Debbie Stabenow and Gary Peters. Please welcome Reverend Ken Flowers, pastor, New Mount Moriah Baptist Church.
Good morning to everyone, and on behalf of Greater New Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church, I want to welcome you to Pancakes and Politics Overdrive. It is good to welcome you to the hood. So many things have been happening on the North End, and I want you to know that we appreciate your leadership in Washington, D.C. We urge you to make sure that as we do great works in downtown Detroit, great works throughout the city of Detroit, great works throughout Michigan, that we do not forget about urban renewal, our neighborhoods, because our neighborhoods, this is our lifeblood. This is the jewel of the North End. We welcome you to this jewel. We welcome you here. We're going to do a whole, I've been here for 27 years, succeeding Dr. Benjamin Hooks, my predecessor, who served for 30 years. In the 27 years I've been here, I've tried to do what I could to make sure that this community is a better place. So I want to welcome you here. Thank God for you being here. Let's get the work done. We have two great senators, and we know that with their leadership in Washington, Detroit, the neighborhood, the city is going to go to the mountaintop. So once again, on behalf of Greater Mount Moriah, welcome to the hood, welcome to the jewel in the neighborhood. God bless you and welcome.
Today's sponsor remarks will be presented by Jeff Donofrio, President and CEO, Business Leaders for Michigan.
Congratulations to the team here at the Michigan Chronicle for bringing us together in the North End. As an East Sider, I'm glad to be in this part of town, and certainly I want to thank Pastor Flowers and all of the work of this church and that he does every day, especially for social justice, because I think we have this united effort amongst business leaders, amongst elected officials, amongst church leaders, and all of us to make sure that really prosperity is widely shared in this state. For about a decade and a half, we saw growth. We saw a lot of jobs come to Michigan, but we know that those jobs, that prosperity, that growth in our state was not widely shared. At Business Leaders for Michigan, which I'm president and CEO of, we represent the executives of Michigan's largest employers, the companies that have over $1 trillion of economic activity in this state. They represent really 500,000 workers, and it's important to them to make sure that we have a widely shared prosperity, that we grow our economy, that we're healthy, and that we're a leader. We become a top 10 state in just a few years, hopefully. Now, I think it's something that we know that you have to have a plan, you have to have a strategy and a vision if you're going to actually reach your goals. We recently released our Compete to Win plan for the state of Michigan that has recommendations on how we can become a top 10 state. You can find that at businessleadersformichigan.com. I want to just give my praise here to our two speakers here today. Senator Stabenow, Senator Peters are two of the most important elected officials in the state of Michigan, and two of the hardest working elected officials on behalf of businesses and people and communities in our state. They work every day to make sure that education and our kids get a better shot at opportunity and improve education. They make sure that we have safe drinking water, that we have our roads and bridges fixed. And I just commend your work in doing that in Washington, fighting for Michigan jobs. I'm looking forward to this morning's discussion, and we're so pleased to be sponsors here of Pancakes and Politics. Thank you.
And now, introducing the host of Pancakes and Politics Overdrive, Dennis Archer Jr., CEO, Ignition Media Group.
You know, when thinking about my comments and our discussion and where we are today, a couple things came to mind. And you hear so much about gentrification, so I just want to reflect my recollection and actually look up the definition. And so as I Googled, the first thing that came up is that gentrification is the process whereby the character of a poor urban area is challenged by wealthier people, moving in, improving housing, and attracting new business, typically displacing current inhabitants in the process. A number of us in the room had the luxury or benefit from participating in McKinsey & Company's Black Leadership Company a week and a half or so ago, where they shared a tremendous amount of data. And you hear the news, you hear when the census report comes out, they give you data about your community. But when you hear an entity like McKinsey & Company give a presentation and they give you the deck in black and white, you realize how dire some of the circumstances that many of us are living in just around the corner from where a lot of us live. But I will say that while it is true, many Detroiters live at or below the poverty rate, I would discourage anyone from calling us poor in general, because many of us are rich in spirit. We are rich in culture and the desire to do better for our families. Where we may be poor, in addition to be poor as defined by income level, we're poor as it relates to opportunities. We're poor as it relates to access to financing and expertise, and that is why we are here today. For those of you who come to the DAC with some sort of regularity, you will hear Hiram say the reason that Pancakes and Politics is at the DAC is because that's where the money is. We are in the streets today in the North End because this is where the opportunity is. But in order for us to take advantage of that opportunity, we need the help of our federal government, which is why we're so lucky to have our two senators here with us this morning. But before we go any further with introductions and our program, we're going to see a quick video.
This is not a story about gentrification. You know the one. Outside investors contribute to a neighborhood. Because of this investment, housing and the cost of living soon exceed the income of the native residents. This isolates and then ultimately displaces the original community. This is not a story about gentrification. It's about what happens when investment projects are predominantly led by the people who live in the community. This is a story about the North End of Detroit. For the first time in nearly 60 years, the nation's affluent and middle class are again choosing to live in and near city centers instead of faraway suburbs. And as investors rush to cash in, legacy residents, community leaders, and legislators must work together to ensure revitalization doesn't lead to displacement.
Because of the moment that we're in the city, and quite frankly, I believe because of our heartbeat as a innovative, gritty folk, we have an opportunity to get this right. If we can work collaboratively, if we can keep communicating, if we can work through differences to approach neighborhood strengthening, community building in a way that doesn't necessarily lead to gentrification. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of abandonment, a lot of sort of empty houses, lots of demolition has happened there over the last couple of decades. In that negativity, there's a whole lot of optimism, because that means that you actually can grow the neighborhood without creating gentrification. Now you have to be very intentional about how you do that. You have to sort of think long term and make sure that you're introducing sort of all the right supports. But I think there's a real possibility that the North End can be a model of how you can go into predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods and create more opportunity, more amenities for existing residents without the pressure of forcing them out of their homes.
A lot of the things that's happening, a lot of the good things that's happening in the neighborhood is things that people have already been working on with absolutely no help. So it's great to partner with people that's already in the mindset of, we're gonna get this done regardless of if you're with us or not. So my job is to really just throw another log on the fire and really accelerate the things that's already happening in the neighborhood.
The only way we're able to make this happen is because we come from a place where we have this strong tradition of black consciousness and this strong tradition of resistance, this community of people who have created an example for the world of what it looks like to struggle for justice and equity. So the Detroit People's Food Co-op is most significant when it is linked to ending the extraction of wealth and the suppression of power of black communities throughout the United States.
I want the North End residents to get their due. This is a historic neighborhood that still has that DNA, and all of that is still resonating with the people that's here. You know, I think that as far as cooperative economics, this is a neighborhood that's pioneering a lot of that work. As far as community internet, this is a neighborhood that's already pioneering a lot of that work. As far as urban agriculture, this is the neighborhood that's already pioneering that work. As far as Afrofuturism, I think that this is a neighborhood that thinks of itself as an Afrofuturist. So they're talking about the future of smart city work in the arts. They're talking about what it looks like when black designers get a hold of architectural space. What does it mean for there to be black space in these neighborhoods? So, like I said, it's such an idea-rich neighborhood. It's just amazing to partner with these folks.
This is where many legacy Detroiters call home, and where community leaders work together to make sure growth works for everyone. As investment rises in the form of development, talent retention, and evolution in education, the needs of legacy residents must be on the policy agenda. All must thrive for a strong and healthy state.
Welcome back out of the house.
It's good. I know, in person.
And you're in the North End.
Yeah, I love it.
With Reverend Flowers.
I love it, Reverend Flowers. Always great to be with Reverend Flowers.
And Gary, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good, good.
Good to see you again.
Hey, good to see you as well. You know, it's interesting. The video, albeit only 4 minutes, was very powerful. And, you know, Sonia Mays, who's in the audience with us today, talks about revitalization not necessarily, doesn't necessarily have to cause displacement, and that out of negativity can be born opportunity. And many people that are joining us here live, and many more that will be watching this later this week, are participating in the revitalization of Detroit. I'm always clear it up when people say that Detroit is coming back or it's a comeback, because Detroit hadn't gone anywhere. Some people on the outside may choose when to dip their toe in and out of the water, but those of us, many of us, have been here for decades, and many of the people in this room have been here for decades. However, a lot of people feel that Detroit has been given up on, and that Detroit is also just an example of urban Michigan and urban America, and a lot of our urban citizens and its residents have been given up on. So I'd love to hear, just at 50,000 feet, before we dive into specific questions, you know, what you all believe the role of the federal government is in shoring up our urban centers, and maybe with some level of specificity, some of the programs that are helping to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ladies first.
Well, thank you. Well, we're a partner. I mean, this is, it's federal, state, local, neighborhood, business, church community. I mean, it's all of us partnering together. And frankly, it makes a difference who's president of the United States.
Yeah.
Because we now have a president in President Biden who we don't have to convince, and a vice president in Kamala Harris. And so when we move forward on the American Rescue Plan, which very much brought and is bringing resources to this community, to the city, to the state, and so on, we didn't have to make, you know, a big case for this. It was instinctive. You know, our majorities now in the House and the Senate. The infrastructure bill, making sure that minority business contractors are involved specifically, and that we're making sure that when we are providing contracts, that we're monitoring where they're going, and that they're going to the Black community, that they're going broadly to everybody in the community. I do want to say that in addition to the things that we are doing doing now that we've been working on a number of things for a few years to really support and strengthen the community more broadly as well. You know, I chair the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee, and when I took over originally in 2011, things were really being talked about in Detroit. So what are we doing? You know, how do we, in talking to the mayor and so on. And I said, what can I do from a rural committee? And so I focused on the fact that we funded farmers markets. And so the first thing I did was really weigh in on Eastern Market, and so many great things are going on in Eastern Market. And then I was able to put in place an urban agriculture office, which we now have. And Detroit is leading and has been leading on. You had Malik, which was great, D-Town Farms on the video. I'm going to give a shout out to Jerry Hebron, who's right here from Oakland Avenue Farm, right here, a couple blocks away from here, who's doing fantastic things
That's
as
right,
well
by
as
Red
others.
Shoe Shine. I don't know, you may not know about Reds.
Well, I don't get my shoe shine, but I do know about Reds, and so, but I'm going on over to get jams and jellies and the things that we need to get. But I have to tell you, we now have a national advisory committee on urban agriculture. Jerry is one of the original members. It's a 12-member committee. I made sure that she was represented, that Detroit was represented. But to go farther in terms of what are our roles, this year we were, for the first time in a long time, able to bring back what used to be called earmarks. And I was able to get a new $1 million investment for Eastern Market on a business accelerator. Now, what is this? We have folks going, selling product on the weekend, growing, selling. We want to help them produce more. And now we're seeing people go from selling on the weekend to their own retail operation. And I can go right around Detroit and name folks who started at Eastern Market who now are small business owners and expanding. So our role is to support that. It's already here, as you were saying. People, leadership, entrepreneurship, folks who care. It's already here. I believe our job is to help provide the resources to get out of the way when the federal government's in the way, and to be able to give every single opportunity possible for folks to thrive.
I love the focus on the urban agriculture and Eastern Market. I mean, people often talk about what's factual about how segregated Metro Detroit is. But there are a few things that unify people: food, music, and I would put Eastern Market as part of that. When you go down there early Saturday morning, you see people from all walks of life. And the fact that you have black folks having farms in the neighborhood is amazing. And that agricultural backdrop, I think, is going to continue to help bring people together. So
I do too. I think it's really important.
So Gary, what's your opinion on things in that regard?
Well, I certainly just want to build on Senator Stabenow's statements, but there's no question that we have to build communities from within the community and a focus on community. And we do have areas of this country that have been underserved for years, and that continues, unfortunately. But I think what we're seeing, certainly with the Biden administration, which is critically important, I can tell a difference from my years in the Senate. Having the Biden administration there and Kamala Harris understands urban areas makes things a whole lot easier. But one thing that certainly was very clear over these last few years as we dealt with this pandemic, and all of us were front and center dealing with the issues. Debbie and I worked on that, but I chair Homeland Security Committee in the Senate. We oversee FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management folks that are involved in natural disasters. And what we've seen over the years is key. When a natural disaster hits communities, those communities that tend to be underserved get hit disproportionately. They get hit in a dramatic way, and they don't recover because the resources aren't there, because there isn't a community focus that there should be. We saw that here in the city of Detroit during the pandemic. We were one of the earliest places to be hit after New Jersey. You remember we were scrambling to get basic medical supplies, get help into the city of Detroit. And I was dealing with FEMA, an organization that said, well, you know, we have a crisis across the country. Let's make sure the money gets distributed equally. Well, we didn't have enough money to go equally. And there were some communities that were hit really hard. This is like triage in a hospital. You should be going to those communities that need it the most. That wasn't the case. It was an attempt to try to be more equitable. And what you see with a lot of FEMA grants is that those more affluent communities actually apply and get more grants than those who don't have the resources to do it. That has to change. So we're in the process of changing that now. I have legislation to create an equity office within FEMA to understand when you rebuild communities, you have to rebuild those that have been hit the hardest, and those tend to be underserved areas. And so that will change the dynamic dramatically here in places like Detroit and other communities across the area. But the other part of that work that that I do, it's the Government Affairs Committee. We do all federal procurement, contracting issues, talking about minority contracting and investment, access to capital, which is critical. We have to have minority depository institutions, community investment banks to be funded to do that. But it's also about the contracting process. We've got a federal government process that says, which can be very helpful for a small business to have those contracts. They can be really stabilizing for your business. It says that in order to get a federal contract, you have to show experience with a federal contract. Well, that's crazy. That's the chicken before the egg thing. So you have the same folks that always get those contracts, and they tend not to be in our communities. We have to make sure small businesses in our communities that are serving those, and those that get the hardest of the disaster too, but those communities, businesses have to have access to both federal contracts, money for that, as well as the funding necessary and the capital to build those businesses. And when you do that, you grow from the community. The community itself grows, the community prospers, and everybody is able to benefit from it. So that's certainly a major focus for me.
Debbie, you mentioned some of the COVID relief. We had the CARES Act, we had the American Rescue Plan, which are tremendous one-time shots in the arms for communities and governments and institutions. But how do we ensure that we get longevity out of these single shots in the arm and that the investment goes forward? Because part of the issue is look at our governor, and she's grappling with how to spend some of the money. You don't want to start programs with the funding necessarily that you cannot continue. And so you struggle with how to put the money to get the most longevity out of it. From your perspective as the one participating in the legislation providing that money, do you have any insight as to how we create or invest that money to create longevity?
Well, that's very important. And the American Rescue Plan, which I do just have to say, because it's important just to say it, which we passed a year ago. We didn't have one Republican with us on that, which was so disappointing, because all the rest of the packages had been bipartisan, but just for the record, not one. But in that, a lot of it was to help folks survive, small businesses survive, restaurants, theaters, individuals, help us get safe vaccines, open schools, all really, really important things to do. But then the question is, going forward, like you said, the infrastructure bill that we passed, which did have bipartisan support, which is great, really did a number of things structurally to do that. For the first time, there's a minority business development office that was made permanent for the first time. Very important, just right in our own Detroit, and Michelle and all the great work that's going on there. Again, around contracting and support for small businesses and so on, both in requirements for the construction projects, but also in general as well. So a number of things, and I was so happy. I've been working on how we strengthen Made in America laws for years. Everybody talks about it, we never did it. We actually did it. We have a new Made in America office, and so when federal contracting is happening now, you can't just say, I don't know a business that can do it, so we're just gonna give a waiver and not pay attention to it. Now you have to prove nobody can do it. And our manufacturing partnerships, working with small manufacturers, have to be called in and be told that there's federal contracting for something and go out and try to recruit people and so on. So long term, when we look at this, we're trying to build structures where we are making it here, we're using our tax dollars here, supporting our businesses, supporting our workers, that we are putting in place long-term structures and investments to be able, and that's happening in a number of areas. I mean, certainly the educational efforts that we're doing, what Dr. Viti is doing here in Detroit, long-term looking at rebuilding buildings, adding more school buildings, those kinds of efforts we need to back up as well. And I will just say, because in talking to Dr. Viti, when I asked him what was the #1 challenge he had bringing kids back, and he said mental health. And so this has been a structural area for me to really work on, ongoing community behavioral health clinics, school-based health clinics. Dr. Viti is using resources to do that. We want to keep that going so that there are structural changes to support the quality of life, jobs, opportunity. It's not just one time.
So you mentioned jobs and opportunity. Gary, the two of you announced, I think it was around $237 million effort for Michigan small business. And, you know, it's great that we hear that our OEMs and Tier 1 automotives and others are investing billions of dollars and creating thousands of jobs at a single site. But we know that job creation happens at the small business level. And there are many aspiring black entrepreneurs here in the North End around Reverend Flowers Church and across the city of Detroit. Talk about how that funding will help Detroit small business.
Well, it is absolutely essential, as you mentioned. That's the engine of growth, not just in our communities, but all across the state. Most jobs are going to be created in a small business. It's where you get the dynamism of new ideas and energy. And so this money and state small business credit initiatives, other things that we've been moving forward, is providing the capital to actually invest in a small business. The hardest thing that I know for any kind of small business is just getting the initial seed capital to start your business. You got a great idea. You've got big visions for the future, but if you don't have some seed capital to actually get it off the ground, it's not going to happen. That has to be the focus. That's where these grant programs come into place. And I think that that's why they also need to be focused into communities. I mentioned in the other comments, minority-owned business or financial institutions, for example, tend to invest in those local communities. They need to have capital as well. So how do we spur their capital so they have more money to lend, and to lend at a favorable rate is really important. And that's where you get some of the sustainment, which was your previous question too, is that capital has to be there and it has to be able to be lend there and to continue to work. And then to invest in the infrastructure in those communities. Another piece of infrastructure, for example, that I worked on and got into the investment bill is the STORM Act, which is investments to deal with climate change. And we know that one of those impacts in our urban areas is flooding. We've seen the flooding here in Detroit. We've seen the flooding in our neighborhood communities. And we've got to be able to deal with that, because the one thing we know about the future is that storms are going to come at us with greater frequency and greater intensity. And that means more flooding. So how do we build more resilience in that infrastructure for the long term, so that as we're doing all these other pieces, we're not constantly dealing with some sort of crisis because of a flood, for example. So this legislation creates a revolving loan fund that would be available for communities that need to have resources. They don't want to pay high interest rates. They've got to be able to borrow that, and then build a system that when there's a flood, it can handle it, so we don't have houses flooded and huge cost to the homeowners who have made investments in their homes or their businesses, and then finally see those things flood out with a big rain event. And so that will be put in place. And we know that for every dollar that taxpayers invest in resiliency, ends up saving $6 to a community. It's a huge kind of long-term investments that we have to make now. While we're investing in businesses, we also have to protect that infrastructure and homeowners' infrastructure.
Just to follow up on that, because this is such an important point. When we talk about the infrastructure bill, we think roads, bridges, we think of all the orange cones that we are now trying. I keep reminding myself, I'm trying to, okay, somebody's working. Okay, we're fixing the road as I'm sitting on I-75. So, but it is water. It's eliminating lead pipes. I mean, and Flint, as much of a horror as it was, it's also Detroit. It's every urban community. We've, in addition to the infrastructure bill, in part of the new, again, congressionally directed dollars, we've brought in millions of dollars from Detroit to Pontiac to the entire region on specific projects, water projects, that are going to make a difference. They're not the big sexy things. Who talks about the Martin Drain or the Great Lakes Interconnector that goes from St. Clair down. But the truth is that those dollars that we've been able to get in this budget this year are going to specifically go to efforts that will make a difference in Detroit neighborhoods going forward, to be able to stop the flooding that happened and be able to create, again, more ways to handle this. And I would say, and we saw this in Gaylord, we just saw it in Gaylord, and what happened when a tornado came down and has destroyed parts of a community. If this is about the climate crisis. This is about pollution in the air that's been there and growing for 100 years, that's not been addressed, and we are now facing the effects. When you see flooding on the highway or in a Detroit neighborhood, or you see the destruction in Gaylord, we're looking at the climate crisis. And so when we talk about resiliency for how do we handle it, that's one piece. But the other piece that we care deeply about and are really trying to move forward is how do you stop the pollution? And for us in the long run, if we get enough chips going to make those electric vehicles, it's all about clean energy and electric vehicles, which Detroit's going to power ahead on, and clean energy and so on to be able to help us cut down on that pollution so we have less costs of destruction, which is what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I'm going to bring in my colleague Andre momentarily, but one more question because we have some audience members that want to ask some questions and to participate. But switching topics for a second, we saw what happened in Buffalo this week. We're all familiar with what happened in Oxford. And, you know, it's obviously very troublesome. The uptick in violence in urban areas and is around the country. It's not just a Detroit issue. From a legislative standpoint, there's kind of two different things in play. One, there's how do we get more guns off the street and limit access to purchasing firearms. And two, the protections that some people think should be impenetrable as it relates to social media. I mean, you have a lot of these folks, like the guy in Buffalo, basically broadcasting and forecasting what they're going to do. But you have a lot of the social media and digital platforms and industry fighting for protection of their members. How do you find that balance? How do you balance the legal access to firearms to a responsible person versus people who should not have them not being able to acquire them? And how do you balance people's rights as it relates to expression, but without having people be able to broadcast negativity and actually forecasting violence?
Well, let me take that part in particular. This is an issue that we are grappling with within the Homeland Security Committee, because this is about a homeland threat that we're seeing, a significant threat. In fact, if you look at the domestic terrorism, which is what we saw in Buffalo, is basically domestic terrorism, plain and simple, clearly guided, again, because of the insidious ideology of replacement theory. It's white supremacy, it's anti-Semitism, anti-government. And unfortunately, these groups are powered to a large measure because of social media as well. They've always been there, but they are growing in numbers, and they're all able to connect through social media. So how to deal with it has to be a multifaceted approach, but there's no question the Department of Homeland Security needs to be focused on domestic terrorism. Both the FBI and the Director of Homeland will tell you that the number one terrorism threat in this country is not from foreign terrorists, it's from homegrown folks, and normally folks who are inspired by the insidious ideology of white supremacy. And so we need to allocate more resources through the department to be focused on it, and this is a big change. We're seeing that now. We did not see this with the previous administration. It was pretty clear that that wasn't a focus of the last administration. The Biden administration is focused. Secretary Mayorkas, who's the Secretary of Homeland, putting more resources to try to track what's happening on social media, to understand that those words can lead to violence. We saw words lead to violence on January 6th with the insurrection. We see it with attacks on our mosques and synagogues and churches and in community places. We have to be able to track that and to be able to intervene when appropriate, but also hold social media companies accountable to that. I'm going to have a hearing on this coming up shortly with social media companies within Homeland Security. We had a hearing beforehand, and it shows that their business model actually takes people down to more extremist thought. In fact, if you put out just some kind of innocuous searches with a particular group or ideology, pretty much you're pretty quickly taken down a rabbit hole to more and more extreme, because the business model wants to keep you on the platform so they can serve up more ads to you. The longer you stay on that platform, the better. And so they have to keep giving you more content that's, kind of get you going, get you angry, get you mad, get you going. And when you get somebody mad and really going, that can lead to dangerous violence. In fact, during our previous hearing, folks who were interested in perhaps going to the Capitol on January 6th and were searching this before January 6th, they were starting to get served up ads for guns, for body armor from social media platforms, or the ads that they were getting. Which has got to stop. We cannot let that happen. There has to be some accountability that goes into this, and this is what we'll be moving forward. And you talk about free speech. You're free to express ideas, but you can't run into a theater and yell fire and put people's lives in danger. It's the same kind of concept when it comes to social media as well. We've got to put those guardrails in place. We're working on that aggressively to do that. And I'll also say just one final point too with what we're doing, we also have to make sure though, unfortunately, because this is the environment we're in, there'll be safeguard places of worship with Reverend Flowers here and his sanctuary and others. That's why we work together to have security grants that are now available for places of worship, federal grants that can help make sure that when people go to a sanctuary, they feel safe. They should. It's the one place we should all feel safe, and certainly would encourage any of our places of worship here in the Metro Detroit area to contact my office or Debbie's office. We can get them in contact with folks that might be able to help protect their parishioners.
Right. Let me talk about guns for a sec, because, but before saying that, I mean, I think it's very clear. We know this, but we need to constantly remind people that, you know, folks who used to hide under white sheets have been given permission to take the sheet off and walk down the middle of the street.
Yep.
And that, and this was unleashed in the former administration, has been taken to a whole nother level now that is so dangerous. Related to that, though, is what's happened on guns. And there's a book called Gunfight, written by a former NRA leader, and he was a head of a major manufacturer. His name is Kevin Bussey. I invited him in to actually speak to our Senate Democratic Caucus, which he did. And he has now stepped away from them because of what he saw in fomenting all of this. And he talked about how under President Obama and under former Democratic presidents, they all, and particularly President Obama, the word went out, President Obama will take away your gun, right? And so first it was that when he was elected, he would take away your bullets. So there was a run on bullets. And this is all funded by the gun manufacturers. It's all money. So let's make people scared. You're gonna lose your gun, so go out and buy more guns right now. And by the way, I grew up in Clare. My whole family hunts, and you know, I've been around safe gun ownership all my life. That's not what this is.
Right.
That's not what this is. And so they do that. So then President Trump gets elected. Nobody thinks he's going to take away your gun. So now what do? Well, let's make people afraid of each other. Let's say it's the immigrant. Let's say it's the Muslim. Let's say it's the black or brown individual. Let's say, you know, it's Black Lives Matter. Let's put everybody. So then you've given permission to the white supremacists. Then you add that you better get more guns because of those people. And you get where we are. And then you add social media, where when you were talking about January 6th, then you go online, then they take you to gun sites. So do we need to regulate the major communicators now in our nation and world? Yes, in terms of accountability. Do we need common sense gun laws? Does somebody need a military assault weapon, you know, to hunt? No. You probably need target practice if you do need a military assault weapon to hunt, you know. But that's the scary part of where we are. And the president knows it, we know it. We need a few more folks to help us out, be able to do this in the Senate. But this is something that we all need to take responsibility for.
Agree. So Andre Ash, my esteemed colleague, is going to take some questions from our audience.
Thank you. You started this conversation about gentrification. As somebody who grew up in the neighborhood, how is federal policy addressing the consistent issue that there are not dollars for home repair? That when we talk about spaces and these things, there's always the brand new space, but not the I'm investing in allowing Ms. Johnson to live in her community, to stay in her home, and to grow, and for people, young folks, to buy that first house because it has issues, whether it be lead paint or a host of other things.
Well, first let me say, and it's great to see you. First let me say that the American Rescue Plan has done a number of things, more to be done, certainly. And certainly in the beginning, to stop folks from losing their apartment, their you know, as if they're a rental or their mortgage, moving through all of this is very important. But now there are some new efforts. There's a new effort to allow folks to get up to $25,000 in repairs on your home rather than having to move, for instance. It's interesting to me, my daughter works with working families, low-income families in Lansing area, and told me this one program that they are now administering to help people pay for repairs rather than having to look for a new place to live. is really transforming a lot of help for neighborhoods and for families. And she said, why wasn't that being done before? And that's a really good question, why that wasn't being done before. But we need to keep that kind of thing going as well, and supporting existing homes, supporting the efforts like is being done in Detroit to go into neighborhoods strategically and use blight removal funds, not to tear down a whole neighborhood, but to tear down a few homes in a neighborhood where the rest of the homes are in good shape, and then support those homes and support those neighborhoods and the neighborhood groups and so on. So it feels we are making changes as it relates to housing, federal programs, home repairs, utility support, and so on. But we certainly have more to do to focus on it.
All right, turning to our second audience question is Pamela Martin Turner with Vanguard. And go ahead with your question this morning.
Sure. This actually follows up on Adam's question. It has to do with the HUD budget. In years past, the federal dollars were always the yeast that made the bread rise in a project. It came in first, and it made a big difference. We don't see that as much anymore, and I think it's just partially because the HUD budget has been cut tremendously over the last 15 years. Are there efforts to restore the HUD budget, particularly the Community Development Block Grant Program and the Home Program?
Yes, absolutely. There's no question there's a focus on that. We were hoping to get that passed already. We're going to do it going forward. It's a focus, especially it goes back to Dennis's question too about how do we bring stability long-term into the communities with these investments, and the Senator's question as well, is that we know we have a housing crisis in this country, that housing prices continue to go up, and we're seeing not enough supply, particularly when it comes to affordable housing. People are moving out because of that or can't move into a community to do that. And so we have to make substantial investments. Senator Stabenow talked about some of those investments already that we're making. But we aren't going to be successful unless we increase the HUD budget. I have legislation myself, a revitalizing community, that will provide grants to be able to revitalize that, a $5 billion fund. There are other proposals out there that we're working to make sure that that money comes in absolutely early, because we will not stabilize our communities, we will not grow our neighborhoods if you can't have affordable housing. And it takes a substantial investment from HUD. And these are, again, this is about saving actually in the long run taxpayer money. When you stabilize neighborhoods, when you allow those neighborhoods to grow and then generate even more revenue back in, it's actually a great deal for taxpayers. And it's a fabulous deal for people who live in these neighborhoods, can stay in those neighborhoods and prosper. So that is, the efforts we've made so far are just the start. And I can assure you the Biden administration's all on board with us as well to make sure we continue to make these investments.
And I would just say we have a great new Secretary Fudge, Secretary of Housing. She's got a great leader from Detroit working with her right now, and we have stopped the cuts. I mean, we are not cutting HUD anymore. It's being increased, and the community development block grants as well.
All right, now Sonia Mays joins us now with our next question.
Thank you. Detroit and the greater Southeast Michigan, we've been in an arms race for the last several years for the future of the automotive industry. Could you talk a little bit about how you're leading the state at the federal level so we can be as competitive as possible as our country shifts to electric vehicle?
I'm spending a lot of my time as a member of the Finance Committee on this. The reality is that we have the innovation in Michigan, and we have the workers, we have the leaders here in Michigan. We have to just double down to support what the industry is doing as they are moving forward with tens of billions of dollars on electric vehicles and so on. One, in the infrastructure bill that we already passed, we have all kinds of funding for charging stations now, so across the state. I kept telling our leaders that when we had enough charging stations, I would be able to buy an electric vehicle in Michigan and drive to D.C. That's now happening, and I just bought my first fully electric vehicle, and I'm going to be driving it to Washington because we've got places along the way, and we're going to get more in Michigan to do that. The infrastructure legislation also has about $8 billion to invest in battery innovation. We've got to have those battery plants made here, the cells made here, the battery packs here, so that the jobs are here in our country. The raw materials needed for the batteries we need to have here, lithium and so on. Right now, too much of that's in China. We can't be dependent on that. We have to be here. Semiconductors, we all know what happened when the majority of our semiconductors were coming from one company in Taiwan, and then there's a global shutdown with a pandemic. So all of that, there are already dollars for investments, Secretary of the Energy Department making those, but then the second piece is what we're trying to get done to really give the 1-2 punch. First of all, clean energy manufacturing tax credits. I authored those back in 2009 when President Obama and all of us worked to support the auto industry, to retool plants and so on. There's a lot more that needs to happen around that to help retooling and to help, again, it's all about bringing the supply chain here. And then the electric vehicle consumer tax credit that's been on the books needs to be extended so that when you're purchasing, because things are always more expensive in technology at the very, very beginning. I remember my first cell phone, how expensive that was as opposed to now. And how big it was. And it was permanently in my car. That shows how old I am. It was like embedded in the car. I know.
A suitcase in the car.
Exactly. So we know that with volume, price comes down. And so extending that credit is incredibly important, which is part of the climate package that we have been trying to pass in the Senate. So we are really all hands on deck from start to finish. Raw materials, the batteries, the charging stations, supporting consumers. And I have to tell you our vehicles that we're making right here in Detroit are terrific. So we just need to do everything we can to support them being out on the roads.
Yeah, let me take it to the next level, because this is critically important, is the electrification. But really where the future for mobility lies, which is autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles, which our auto companies are making major investments and will lead the world going forward. And all the engineers tell us the ideal power plant for self-driving cars is electric. So this is all kind of a building process for autonomy. And autonomy will change the world dramatically. One of the biggest changes will be safety. We lose, unfortunately, close to 40,000 people on our highways every year. Nearly all of those accidents are driver error in some form. And with these new technologies, we believe we'll literally save tens of thousands of lives. Mobility has an incredibly promising future, and every country in the world is racing to get to this technology. I want to make sure it's the United States and it's our American-made cars that are those cars of the future. I'm working on legislation now called the AV START Act, which sets a regulatory framework in place to make sure that Stellantis and Ford and General Motors can put these cars out on the road as quickly as possible, safely as possible, to make sure that they're the leader. The last thing I want is that we are buying Chinese cars that are autonomous, because they're investing billions and billions of dollars in this. They know that's the future. We cannot let them win that race. And when we win the race here, we are ideally suited here in Detroit and Southeast Michigan and Michigan in general to be the future of that. And we're seeing tech companies come into our state, making those investments to work with our automakers. Just a quick story. As I was working on this a few years ago, I was out in California with some of the tech companies and talking about self-driving cars. And I was with one of the companies, which will be nameless at this point, maybe later I'll say it. But they said, we're designing all the artificial intelligence systems and all of the computers to be able to safely navigate a car through a city street. So we thought, maybe we should just make the cars too. And then we went to Detroit and we went to an auto factory and wow, that's really a complicated business. It's like, yes, it's a really complicated business. And so they said, we need to partner with our folks, and they're bringing folks here into Michigan. Obviously, we deal out there as well. But what's really exciting for me for Michigan with self-driving cars too is we know artificial intelligence systems are the ones that will pilot these cars. And it's been described by many that artificial intelligence, the moonshot for it, is self-driving vehicles. When they're able to do that, AI is going to transform our society. And that means Michigan's literally the center of the future for the 21st century. Kind of like in the last century, it was here in Detroit that created the American middle class, really set the course of the 20th century in terms of the economy. We could very well, and I believe we are, at the center of the beginning of that for the 21st century, which means incredible economic progress and prosperity. And now our goal is to make sure everybody shares equity, have equally shares in all of that as well. But it's a bright future.
All right, our next question comes from Chanel Jackson.
Thank you, Senators, for your leadership. You know, while I'm proud of all the great things that are happening on the North End and in communities on the West Side in the city of Detroit, I still believe that poverty is the preeminent issue in the city of Detroit. 40% of the children living in our city are growing up in poverty. Yet we know that education, quality education, is what can transcend someone's life out of poverty. But 18% of Detroit public school students are proficient in math. 12% are proficient in reading. What can the federal government do to help our traditional public schools, as well as public charters, perform better so that our children have better outcomes, so that they can transcend from poverty?
This is really number one, number two, number three, right, in terms of the future of all the things that we're talking about. There's significant dollars that have been brought in the last year through the American Rescue Plan, close to $4 billion altogether for the state of Michigan, significant amount being brought to Detroit that's allowing some things to happen right now. And you know, this should have happened sooner. I mean, this is, you know, resources are absolutely critical in terms of the federal government and what we should be doing to support the efforts in the community. So that is beginning to happen in a major way. One of my frustrations is that after we passed the original dollars coming in through the CARES Act and so on, the state legislature held it up for so long. I mean, we were trying to bring in dollars quickly, and the American Rescue Plan bring it in quickly so schools even could just open safely. And they held it and held it and held it, despite what the governor was trying to get going and so on. So they've now finally released dollars, but the resources from the federal level become very, very critical. The other thing I would say, back with my agriculture and nutrition hat on, is that feeding children in school is a part of educating children in school. And what I was able to do during the pandemic at its full peak was to make sure that children who were losing the school meals because they weren't in school or they weren't able to be getting what they need in the summer, that we changed the whole system so that families could pick up a week's worth of food, so that we could do more, so that we could provide opportunities for children, all children in the neighborhood, not have to look at somebody's W-2 as to whether or not they, you know, made $50 more than somebody else and they couldn't get a healthy meal at lunch. So all of these, I believe that school meals should be just part of education and opportunity for children. And we basically opened that up to all free meals. Now, the efforts that we did actually end the end of June, and I'm deeply involved right now, actually, with a war in a fight with Senator McConnell, who doesn't want to extend those, who's been blocking those in the Senate, because we need to extend that in terms of food and opportunity for children. So it's both in the classroom, it's food, and making sure children aren't sitting there with a headache or, you know, a tummy that's growling, and having the food that they need. And then the other thing I would add to that is I've been leading efforts on school-based health clinics so that both from a physical health and mental health standpoint, our teachers, most importantly our children, but our teachers have the support as well as it relates to the support that children need, particularly now around mental health as well as physical health. So I think all of that, and the federal government, for the first time, actually, got money into the budget federally to fund school-based health centers. That just happened a couple of months ago. And so we have important role to play in all those areas.
And if I could just build on that, those are the critical areas, but as you know, it's also important to have early childhood education as well. Preschool is incredibly powerful. The federal government role in all of this is to try to enhance what the states do. Most of all of that is done at the state level. but there are programs that we know are very successful that we fund, but we got to put more money in. Head Start, for example, is probably one of the most successful federal programs to help students very early in life get a start, so even before they get to kindergarten, which sets them on a path for success going forward. But you mentioned reading proficiency, math proficiency, having more dollars in things like reading recovery programs to make sure a child is reading at grade level, at grade 4. You know, the statistic that just kind of blows my mind is that if a child's not reading at grade level at the 4th grade, they will probably never read at grade level the rest of their life. We just really need to be totally focused on these young children before they get into the 4th grade for both math and reading and preschool. And that's where the federal government plays a key role. We're already involved in so many ways to do that, but to bring more resources into that is incredibly important. And then the other passion that I have that also I think helps for students as they get further along into the education too is skills training, is that we've got a shortage of skilled workers that have skills that can immediately lead to a good paying job right out of high school. You can do very well and you don't have any college debt and you can make a really good living. But we don't really focus on skills training in K-12 like we did it in the past. We've got to bring that back. And I think there's an important role which we're working on to have federal resources to help schools provide that kind of training for students that's what they enjoy, that's what they love. And guess what? We really need folks like that in our country, and they're going to have really good paying middle class jobs. So let's start aligning all those priorities.
All right, next audience question comes from Chris Polk, DTE.
Good morning, Senator Stabenow and Peters. I'm Chris Polk from DTE Energy. Normally, when we come to meetings like this, you know, I've got the list of all the things that I would like you to consider in terms of what you can do for us, for our organization, or for the community. My question is actually a little bit opposite this morning. My question is, what can we do for you in the seats that you sit in to support your work and also to bring the real narrative and the real conversations to the table to help you be effective and to help us make change in this country and in this city, in this neighborhood, in this time?
Well, Chris, let me say, first of all, thank you for what DTE is already doing. And when Gary's talking about skills development and so on, I know this is an area deeply that DTE is involved in. And I will go back to the clean energy area and just say to everyone that DTE, both Jerry's, you know, that Jerry Anderson is now with EEI, the national group, is chairing a very important effort, as well as the great work that Jerry's doing here with DTE. But in clean energy area, getting a clean energy electricity policy, DTE has been at the forefront of helping us, trying to get that done, working with utilities across the country right now in terms of how do we put in place the next steps on clean energy. And I appreciate very much, DTE, also when what's called the Clean Power Plant rule, after it had been put in place by President Obama, it was then stopped by President Trump. And I will never forget meeting with Jerry Anderson, who said, we know we need to close these plants anyway, regardless of whether this rule is going away. We're going to clean energy, and we're just going to keep on going. And so I just appreciate, and we need your continued voice and leadership in this. I was talking to the mayor the other day about an initiative I've been talking about for some time, but I know DTE is talking to the city about in terms of planting trees as a way to bring carbon pollution out of the atmosphere, which sounds pretty simple. It's simple, but incredibly effective if you are planting, you know, trees. Not only is it great for the neighborhood, great for communities, but you can actually help clean up the atmosphere by doing that. And so there's so many ways around clean energy that DTE is really leadership. I feel like I'm a commercial right now for DTE. But I would just say, please tell folks to keep doing it. We need your voice.
I just say the help, the question about how you can help us is to bring your ideas. I'd say this to everyone in the audience, everybody who's watching this tonight, that we've got a lot of challenges in this country. There's just no question about it. And I think we are all pretty good at identifying the problems. The challenge is identifying what the solutions are to those kinds of problems. And that takes a whole community to come together to be able to figure that out. You know, we're both out in the community regularly. Our staffs are out in the community. We can go and advocate, and we can write laws and change policies. But I have found from my tenure here in office that the best ideas usually come from the community. When we're out there listening, we go and we're able to pass legislation, make changes in laws that pass because of ideas that actually come from the greater Detroit area or from folks that I meet all across Michigan. So I would encourage everyone to get involved. Government works well when we are all working together to make it work well and to find those solutions and to try to find some of that common ground. And I'm going to take that answer a little bit further to what you can really help us to, everybody who's watching and who's here. Let's bring our communities together. There is way too much polarization. We've got way too much partisanship that's been getting in the way of finding constructive long-term solutions to the intense challenges we face. And then for us to get through that, it's going to take all of us actively engaged, reaching out to our neighbors and our friends and how we come together as a country. I think we're at an inflection point for our democracy. We're seeing democracy challenged by autocrats in Russia. As I wear the Ukrainian flag here on my lapel here, we know what can happen. But we have challenges with our democracy here in this country as well. And we have to come together as one. And it's incumbent on each and every one of us to understand that that's our responsibility to protect this amazing country that we have and this amazing democracy. That would help all of us.
Thanks, Andre. We've got a few more minutes left. There are a couple things, Senators, that are fundamental to a thriving city. Transportation and then public safety. We'll be going up to Mackinac next week. And I can't count how many times transportation and regional transportation has been on the agenda, yet we don't see a lot of movement. However, the two of you were able to secure, I think it was about $84 million in funds for Michigan, and I think 75 or 77 million of that is coming to Detroit. Talk about how that investment in public transportation will help people get to work and will help spark the economy here in Detroit.
Well, these are major investments, and I would say just not very far from here, Amtrak. There's going to be a new facility there. There's going to be a strengthening right here, not very far from here, to be able to create another link. So we need local transportation. We need to build on that, both in terms of buses as well as what's happening downtown. But Amtrak being able to move folks around the city and around the state and so on is really important. So those kinds of funds are coming in, coupled with what the city is doing and the state, as well as when we look at this, it's really a lot of the dollars come to the state. The state decides a plan, but we've been directing dollars specifically to the city as well, to make sure that there's specific dollars as well as the state dollars. And that's going to allow us to leverage the kind of thing that you're talking about. So from safe buses to downtown, to Amtrak, to the roads, to bike paths. I mean, when we look at things like DeQuinder Cut, I mean, in the last round, back when we had earmarks, I was able to bring in the dollars that allowed us to connect Eastern Market to downtown with DeQuinder Cut and all the private foundations that help support that and so on. So it's a lot of different types of transportation, and there's more to do, but I think we're kickstarting it right now with the dollars we're bringing in.
I got to thank you for the bike paths, because as one that cycles, I'm all over town, and they're not just in the DeQuinder Cut in downtown. They're in Highland Park. They're on the east side. It's really phenomenal.
Right. Yeah, there's things all over now. Plus, going out to Belle Isle and what's happening at the riverfront. I mean, trying to connect all of that.
Gary, you also announced actually bipartisan legislation to incentivize community policing. Our police chief is a big advocate of community policing, and when he came out of being the interim chief, Chief White, to being the chief, in the center of his plate was community policing as a way to increase the relationship and improve the relationship between the police and the community, obviously, but then also to create a reduction in crime. Talk about that bill and where that is.
Well, I appreciate that, Dennis. In fact, the bill just passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, so it goes to the floor, and I'm confident I'm going to have the support of my hometown or my senator here, Senator Stabenow. So the legislation is passed out, and it is about making sure that we have police officers that understand the community and know the community, and probably equally as important, folks in the community know the police officers as well. So we know a key part of community policing is having folks actually live in the city and maybe have grown up in the city. Yeah, we're having a real challenge with police all across the country is actually recruiting police officers. They're having a hard time finding people. So we want to try to incentivize getting more people to choose law enforcement as a career. And my legislation says, boy, we'd really love it if people within the community would choose that as a career and then stay in the community and be a law enforcement officer in that community. So this establishes a grant program to allow students who want to go to the police academy to go to the academy, have that all paid for, so there's no financial impediment for them to do that. And then that loan is forgiven over a 4-year period if they stay in the community in which they that they grew up in or where they live. And so the Detroit Police, for example, could hire Detroit students to go to the academy, know that they're going to have a job once they get through the academy with the Detroit Police Department. It'll be covered for them for 4 years. After 4 years, they don't have any obligation. And what we found in our research is that if a police officer stays in the community for 4 years, they tend to stay there the rest of their career. They jump. There's a lot of jumping that goes around, but it's very early in their career. And so this is an opportunity for Detroiters who want to pursue law enforcement to have no impediment to do it, to get that training, and then stay in the community that they love and protect the people that they love and who are their neighbors, and their neighbors know them and trust them as well. It's about trust. Trust is absolutely essential when it comes to quality law enforcement, and I think this is another tool to help us get there.
You know, I would add just a couple of things. I think it's so important what Gary's talking about, paying for training. We have communities around Detroit where if you want to be a police officer, you have to pay for your own training. And the starting wage is really low. And so think about who we're getting, who's interested. I mean, we need to not only pay for the training, have good wages and benefits, really pay people like professionals and expect them to be professionals, to live in the community, to support them, and also to give them the extra tools that they need to, again, have the support they need to address whatever they're going to face. And I'm going to go back to mental health and addiction now, because this is very relevant. And one of the areas I was able to bring in through the congressionally designated earmarks this time is to support efforts between community mental health and the police department here locally, to have crisis teams, folks that will work with the police department. And we know that the police get called to everything, right? And they're not interested in taking somebody who's having a mental health crisis to jail, to sit in a jail, or if they're high, they want to get them help, right? But you have to have the help there, and you have to have the support there. So we ask all things of officers and have not, for a long time, given them the support that they need in a comprehensive way. So that's the other piece of it, is to give them the support, the community partners, the funding, and so that they can do what they need to do, and that there are others there that can help in terms of mental health and addiction.
So, when President Biden won the election, a lot of people thought that Mayor Duggan, because he was so instrumental in that effort, was going to go to D.C. And in talking to the mayor, he commented, why would I, at this time, leave to go do that, when for the first time in decades, we have alignment in Lansing, in the Senate, and in the White House, and what better time to be able to get work done in the city of Detroit on behalf of the citizens. Talk to us about how important these upcoming midterm elections are and how important it is for people to get out to vote.
Oh my goodness. And by the way, I'm a huge supporter of Mayor Duggan, but I'm glad he chose to stay, because we do have this alignment. And when we're bringing in resources directly to the city and watching what the strategic plans are, I'm glad he's there. I'm glad the City Council working with the community and business leaders. I'm glad everybody's there. And alignment is incredibly important for so many reasons. If we want to take the next steps on all the things we have been talking about here, permanent infrastructure, clean energy manufacturing, healthcare, education, all of these things, first of all, we've got to have a United States Senate and United States House of Representatives that will continue to share those values. And that means Democrats, frankly, that will support the President of the United States and his agenda. And in addition to that, we've got to have a governor who gets it and a state group that gets it, with a state legislature that won't hold up federal funds coming in to get the schools open or to support small businesses or to help with the pandemic, that will immediately get those out the door, help somebody with housing, help or whatever, because they will be aligned. Right now in Lansing, we don't have alignment. And so having a state house and state senate aligned so that we can really move is very important. And I would just add one other thing, is that particularly in the United States Senate, now neither Gary and I are up this year, it's me next year, but having a majority in the Senate is critical to making sure that we have a court, a United States Supreme Court, and federal judges moving forward that support our right to privacy, that support a woman's right to make her own decisions on reproductive health, that support civil rights and workers' rights, and you can go right on down the line. Opportunity for people, the opportunity for everybody to be successful, all the things we're talking about here are about the court. So we have a new president who gave us a new Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, which is fantastic. But if there's an opening next year, and Senator McConnell is in the leadership, he's indicated he's not going to fill that. He's not going to fill it for 2 years. So are the elections important? And the same thing with the Michigan Supreme Court, who's on the Michigan Supreme Court, is incredibly important. We are laser focused on top of everything else we're doing on judges, and so far have confirmed over 60 judges. And we're on our way trying to get to 100 by the end of the year in the U.S. Senate, which would be twice as many as were confirmed in the first 2 years of the previous administration. Not only 2 wonderful federal district courts in Michigan, but Stephanie Davis, who's about to be confirmed, we're about to vote on her, who we were able to put on the federal district bench a few years ago, will be the first black woman from Michigan on the U.S. Sixth Circuit, and we're about to vote her in. And so, do elections matter? I don't know if there has ever been a moment where elections matter more, and that doesn't even get into just everything else that we've been talking about here. It's incredibly important.
Gary?
Yeah, let me just briefly pick that up. I could talk at length this because, as you know, I chair the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee. So my job is to hold the Senate majority and expand it. So I have no pressure this fall whatsoever going into this. But it is critically important. I'll just take the Senate perspective, as Senator Stabenow mentioned with judges. But it's the whole breadth of the federal government. Unfortunately, and I mentioned it in a previous answer, how polarized and how partisan we are right now. The president needs to appoint all sorts of folks to make sure the trains are running on time, the wheels are turning, that Mayor Duggan has people that are going to respond to his needs for the city of Detroit. And so those are all sorts of positions, and yet they need Senate confirmation. And right now we're at 50-50, which is not really a majority. As much as we'd love to see Kamala Harris come into the Senate chamber and break a tie, or she's all our former colleague, but we want her to do her VP stuff so we can keep doing our job. But these are jobs that aren't getting filled, and the people of the country suffer as a result of that because we've got Republicans that would delay everything and do not vote for it. I hate to make this partisan, but that's exactly what it is. We can't get folks in key positions just to do the things that are really nonpartisan about delivering, to make sure communities get resources they need, to make sure our small businesses have access to loans. All the things that we've talked about here requires a functioning federal government. And in a hyper-partisan environment, if we don't have that majority, it's not going to get done, and we'll have wasted 2 more years. We can't waste 2 more years. We can't waste any time. The challenges we have are monumental. And if we're going to continue with the progress that we have made so far and continue it for the next 2 years to, whether it's judges or make sure these programs for housing and other kinds of mitigation programs we talked about, people have to get out and vote and make sure that their voice is heard. And I will say right now, especially, back to the comments I made about our democracy in danger. We have, unfortunately, I'm going to say it partisanly, we're Republicans that are trying to make it harder for people to vote, make it more difficult for the process to go forward. And I think it's absolutely critical as Americans that we get out in numbers that people have never seen before, so we can make an emphatic statement that the right to vote is something that's cherished in this country. We will not let anybody take it away from us, and we're going to show up in numbers that you've never seen before, and if you try to mess with our democracy, there's going to be a huge price to be paid.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't see how we end on any higher note. To Reverend Flowers, we appreciate you hosting us in this beautiful building and a beautiful facility. Your staff did an outstanding job. We appreciate being here. To the Real Times Media Michigan Chronicle staff, thank you. To the AVL folks, you guys did an outstanding job as usual. And you've got a lot of people in this room that live in this community, that are of this community. Hiram doesn't live far away. Adam is from this community. I live a mile or two up the street. And so on behalf of the community, the city of Detroit, and really urban Michigan, we appreciate the work that the two of you are doing, and we appreciate your time here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Your biggest takeaways from this conversation and being able to host this conversation?
Well, first of all, I want to thank my friend, my brother Hiram Jackson, for bringing Pancakes and Politics to the hood. Yeah. The DAC is one thing, but bringing it to the North End is another thing. So I want to thank him for bringing it to the hood. The other thing I want to say, to have the power of Washington here at Greater New Moriah in the North End. Senator Peters, Senator Stabenow, it shows that they are interested in the neighborhoods, and when we come together as a community, it shows we can make things happen. So I'm excited about the takeaway. I believe that having them here, having the presence of the community, I believe is going to bring big things for our community.
So we're joined here by Reverend Antoine Colvin, the newly installed pastor of Little Rock Baptist Church. You're part of this community, this important conversation that was held here today. What are your thoughts, reaction?
It's a tremendous opportunity, not only for us within the wider community, but also for this within the church as well, to see what we can do to actively participate in bringing equity as well as justice to those that we serve within our congregation as well as in the community at large. And so it's great to connect with Senator Stabenow as well as with Peters to take a part of this power in empowering our people as well.
Pancakes and Politics is brought to you by PNC Bank, General Motors, and the Knight Foundation. Presenting partner, Business Leaders for Michigan. Platinum partners, Walker Miller Energy Services, Rocket Mortgage, Signal Restoration Services, and DTE. A Real Times Media production.